So time now to take you through the Sunday papers in our news review. I'm joined this morning by Daily Express's senior political correspondent Christian Calgie and Ava Santina Evans, political correspondent at Politics. Joe, very good morning to both of you. Good to see you this Bank Holiday Sunday. We're kicking off with the Sunday Express. There's lots of stories about asylum seekers and immigration, but this one focuses on some of those at the Home Office working on these issues and talking about some of them getting bonuses. They've got the word outrage on their front page, Ava.
Yeah, so Martin Hewitt, who's Labour's border security commander, it's thought received quite a sizable bonus last year, and the anger is that, there's been an uptick in the number of people who are crossing the Channel. It just hit 50,000 about a week ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago now. So the Express are wondering why people are receiving bonuses when, in their view, they haven't achieved their goals. But I have to say the story is, sorry, I know this is your paper, Calgie, the story is rather thin, so you're not quite sure whose bonus aligned with where and why they did receive that bonus. But I think the overall push is to suggest that perhaps border security civil servants aren't working quite as hard as they should be.
I mean, I feel sorry for Martin Hewitt in a way, because he was given a job that he could never do. You know, whatever his title is, at the end of the day, he is a senior civil servant working in the confines of a broken system that the Prime Minister is not willing to fix. There's only so much he can actually do. It's not like he can leave the ECHR without the Prime Minister's approval, or the other reforms that need sorting. So at the end of the day, yes, it is an enormous salary for what I would perceive as a completely pointless job, but it's not like he can actually stop the boats.
Do you think that's fair, that he's been given an impossible task, given the remit that the government has set?
I mean, sure, he's at the whim and the behest of the government. I suppose the government's line is to stop the boats, and if Kemi Badenoch gets in, it'll be to have zero boat crossings, which is absolutely impossible. There is no way you can ever patrol, 150 kilometres of French coastline and hold any boat from leaving there. So yeah, I would say that Martin probably does have an impossible job. His salary here, though, £200,000, which is higher than the Prime Minister's. So I suppose there are questions around how much civil servants are being paid, but perhaps it shouldn't be a race to the bottom. Perhaps it should be, actually. It's quite nice to have well-paid jobs still existing in the country.
I wish I were paid £200,000 for doing nothing.
Well, I'm sure he would say he doesn't do nothing. I think he would say that would be very unfair. But this whole issue of frustration around immigration, it features in a lot of stories on the front pages. The Sunday Times picks up on this, and some of the response that the government is putting out there, and new plans to try and speed up the asylum processing system so that there are fewer people ultimately being put up in taxpayer-paid hotels.
Yeah, exactly. So the Sunday Times claims that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is going to try and curb judges' powers, specifically in response to concerns that they are over-interpreting the ECHR rights to a family life, which is used by a lot of illegal migrants to stay in the country, and they are hoping to cut the time that appeals take, specifically by removing one of the key stages in the process, and not having judges intervene on that. But they're
going to have special panels, aren't they?
Exactly.
With adjudicators that will do it more quickly.
And we see this is a big weekend. Lots of protests now happening following the Epping migrant hotel ruling earlier this week, which lots of councils are now expected to follow. Which the government seems to be in a bit of confusion about all this, because on the one hand they say they want to close all the hotels, and they're sort of fine with the Epping ruling because that's what they're doing anyway. But on the other hand, they're now challenging it.
But you can understand that, really, because they would have a huge problem, wouldn't they, if suddenly loads of hotels weren't allowed to house migrants?
Yeah.
It's a question of where they go, I guess.
Exactly, and then they're not willing to say that, and I think that's because the Keir Starmer promised that he would not use military bases like the Conservatives were doing, but I think he's going to have to, given that we've had an enormous flow of illegal migrants over the last year And the government...
That much more than it was the year before. I think a lot of it is
it's
overblown.
not, but the government... Well, I read a brilliant... I think it was Fact Check UK who pointed out that whilst the government... Full fact, thank you. That the government's claiming that they've closed around half of the hotels, but they've actually only closed 3, and the vast majority were closed under the previous Conservative government. So there's very clearly an enormous problem with where to actually house the migrants.
Different. I mean, the picture's so mixed, isn't it? You can also say that there are fewer people in hotels now than there were 2 years ago under the Tories. So it's not a good picture as far as the government is concerned. They don't want this situation, but it's been tricky in the past as well. But what do you make of these latest moves?
Well, I would just add to that James Cleverly was very keen to point out that under his administration, under his prowess, he shut down a number of asylum hotels, including the Bell Hotel. Actually, when you break down those figures and you look at the official Home Office statistics, he actually was spending more on secondary accommodation. So while he might have closed hotels, he was actually having to spend money on things like HMOs, things like barracks, that sort of thing. So actually, the cost of housing asylum seekers under the Conservatives was more expensive than it is now under Labour. And, I think if Labour could really harness, actually, the argument, which is that the Conservatives effectively halted all processing of asylum seekers back in 2014. And so they've got this enormous backlog of people, which is why people are stuck in hotels. If they could harness the proper argument around that and explain to the public that this is a problem that is, that is backed up over a decade now, then perhaps there might be more time allotted to the Prime Minister to clear the backlog and then, sort the problem. But at the moment, Labour are sort of chasing their own tail. You look at the first line here of the Sunday Times article, and it could be something that's written by a Reform MP, in an effort to deport failed asylum seekers faster and stop the hotel crisis derailing the immigration strategy. I mean, that's like something that Nigel Farage would come out with, not a Labour government.
Well, yeah, and briefly on that, I mean, is Reform sort of directing the traffic a bit here?
I don't think Reform are directing the traffic insofar as they are more riding a wave of natural sentiment. I don't buy this idea, as we hear from quite a lot of vocal left-wingers, that the government is bowing to political pressure from Reform and from right-wing newspapers. I think this is a genuine grassroots anger. And the key thing for the government is that they cannot get away with just moving illegal migrants from hotels to private accommodation. People are very angry and they want them out of the country. And that's not something that this Labour government is able to do.
Let's move on to the Sunday Telegraph. On their front page, they've got an article here about Nigel Farage talking about Lucy Connolly, who was released this week. She was imprisoned for a tweet around the time of the Southport riots.
Yeah, so she's sort of become the poster child, I suppose, for the right's argument on free speech and the restrictions that they say have been put on free speech since Starmer came into power. Lucy Connolly was sentenced to 31 months. She was released early. It was by surprise, wasn't it, really, last week? She sort of was released one random Thursday morning, and then she's been on a couple of arguably right-wing channels since her release, and she has been speaking about her imprisonment. And she's sort of become the pin-up poster for everything that's wrong with free speech in this country. And obviously J.D. Vance, who is the American vice president, he was just visiting the UK, and he hasn't been quiet about his concerns around free speech. And now Nigel Farage is going to take this case to Congress to talk to American senators about the scourge of crackdown of free speech in the UK. I would argue it doesn't really exist. I do think that you are, by and large, free to say most things, but the right think differently.
We've only got 15 seconds. That's not really long enough to give you a chance to come back.
Sorry, Cal.
10 seconds.
I think Lucy. The problem with Lucy Connolly was that she had such a long sentence compared to genuine prisoners.
Next hour, we'll revisit. Thanks so much.
I'd agree with that.